Alrighty. So you have read this already. You already did. I think everybody did the questions over this, so hopefully this is easy anyway. Anything in the that can affect the organism in an ecosystem that are alive. What do we call the alive ones? Remember, the prefix A means not. So biotic would be the living ones. So think about if you're a bear in the woods, what are some living things that might affect them? I gave you people, trees. What else might affect a bear that's alive? Berries. Fish. Okay, and we could have just put prey there, right? Anything that they would be hunting for food, absolutely. All right, so then we have alternative, things that would affect an organism that are not alive. There's the abiotic. Okay, so we'll stick with our bear in the woods example. So I gave you dirt, precipitation, rain, snow, sleet, hail, etc. Rocks, sure. Temperature. What else did I have? Oh, one big one. Water. All living things need water, so water is going to be a pretty important one. All right. Next thing could be some of these, but anything in the ecosystem that can control the size of a population. So this is like, if this is not available, the population has to stay small. If this is more available, the population can get larger. This is a two-word one. I don't know if it was in the reading or not. It's two-worder. I'll give you a limiting factor. So they're literally just factors that limit the population. So don't try to overthink that term. And so depending on the availability of all the limiting factors, there's some maximum amount of a population that can live in a certain area, or maximum amount of a species that can live and thrive and all have enough food and space and all that. So we have the number that a species can reach before they run out of resources. It's another two-worder. Capacity. Carrying capacity. Really squeezed my letters in there. Oh well. Carrying capacity. So if we were thinking carrying capacity for this room in terms of students, I would probably go 21. Right? That's the number of spaces I have reasonably for kids to sit and actually be in a reasonable distance. I'd like not to have to go over the carrying capacity and use the tables back there, or really over the carrying capacity and have people standing around. That would be uncomfortable. Right? Some people would probably try to transfer out if it got to that point. So that's kind of the idea there. So this is a kind of a key idea that we're going to talk about a bunch today. This is determined by the most limited factor. Okay, so if I was just thinking about seating in the room, my carrying capacity, I said, would be probably 21. What if I only have 5 pencils in the room, right? Then could I realistically have 21 kids trying to share 5 pencils? No. So what would really be the carrying capacity in the room? 5, right? So it's not about all of them. It's about whichever one is the most limited is the one that really kind of determines the carrying capacity. So again, some of these are going to be a repeat of our abiotic and biotic factors. So things like food. Everybody's got to have food. Amount of proper habitat. So it doesn't matter how much land there is. If you're an animal that has to live in a tree, you got to have the appropriate habitat to be living in. What else has got to be available? Water. And then this one nutrient is not always just food. A lot of times we think nutrients is food, but nutrients we can get really specific, like nitrogen availability, phosphorus availability, which is a lot of times what happens in people's yards if they start to get yellow. They can make plenty of food because they photosynthesize, they have plenty of sunshine to make food, but if they don't have enough nitrogen to pull out of the ground, they're still not going to do that well, right? So it's not just about food, it's also about specific elements that they need to do stuff. All right, here. And this is kind of a repeat vocab word. So if we're talking about one species, in a certain area? Population. Excellent. All right, so this is just kind of all those ideas we just talked about with like limiting factors is kind of summarized in this law. It's called the Liebig Law of Minimum. And that's somebody's last name. It's not like a big lie. It's just, that's just his last name. So Liebig Law of Minimum. So again, this is the idea that it's not about, a combination of all the factors. It really comes down to which one is the most limiting, and that's going to determine your carrying capacity. So this is kind of supposed to visualize that. So if we built a barrel and each one of these planks is some sort of limiting factor, right? So I can build, maybe this is food availability, and this is water availability, and this is nitrogen in the soil, right? It doesn't matter how high these other planks go. It's all about water's going to spill out right here, right? So it's about whichever one's the most limiting determines the population. All right, then, okay, so since all these people are gone, I really tried to, I went down the syllabus, and I was just like, it says they have to do this. I did that, and then just move on and like not add anything. And so the next bit is literally just definitions that it says have them be able to define this. And so that's the depth that we're going to go. So definitions. Group of organisms that are so similar they can reproduce and make fertile offspring. Thoughts? We are all one of these. Same one of these.
Sexually.
We do all reproduce sexually, or could have the potential to. Examples. Buffalo, cattle, tigers, lions, species. Okay, so why is the second part of that definition important? Because there's a few examples of animals that are not technically species. I know last year we talked about like a horse and a donkey. Horse is a species, donkey's a species. They can cross and create a mule, but a mule and a mule cannot reproduce together. They're sterile. Another example, lions are a species, tigers are a species. We can cross them and make ligers. That is something we can do, but again, ligers are not fertile. They cannot reproduce, so ligers are technically not a species of their own because they can't reproduce. Yeah.
What is unfound? Is it going to be like definitions of how it was?
Like the moral semester final. It'll be like the last one. I think it was mostly vocabulary and a handful of thought questions about stuff that we really talked about a lot. And I think I'm going to do like I did for the last chapter test, where I give you like, 6 or 8 examples of these are potential short answer questions, and then that'll kind of focus your study. Was that useful? That's pretty useful.
Are we just having one, like, final
We'll have one for the semester that counts for moral, and then one for the year that just counts for WNCC, because any class that you would take in college would have a final over everything, so I'm going to try to emulate that one. But that one will be all vocabulary, because it'll
So
be...
the final WNCC is all vocabulary?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. That makes it easier.
Okay.
I was just wondering.
You're fine. All right. Here's a word. This one was hit hard on the questions I had you guys do out of the text. Anytime where there's a close relationship between organisms, and this is the generic, at least one benefits, but we're not saying which one. That's an example. That's one of these. Parasitism is another example. That's one of these kind of sub ones. What?
Is it the C one?
Nope. It starts with an S.
Symbiosis.
Symbiosis. Okay, so all the 3 types of symbiosis are the same in that there's 2 species kind of interacting closely, and one of them benefits. If nobody benefited, they just wouldn't do that, right? So one of them is going to benefit in every single type. If they both benefit, thoughts on which one that is? Mutualism. You were making the M, at least, I think. Okay, so an example, classic example of mutualism is bees, and what other kind of organism? What? Flowers. Right? Everybody benefits. The bees get food, the bees get raw materials to build their hive, flowers get cross-pollinated so they can mix up their genes and be more successful long term. All right, so this one benefits and the other is not affected. This is the C one. Can we finish it out? Commensalism. And I don't know if it will help to remember what it means, but to remember the word. Anybody know what they call graduation ceremonies besides graduation ceremonies? No? Commencement? You ever heard of like a commencement ceremony? Commence means to begin. And so I know that that's where this word comes from, but I've never been able to connect to begin with help one and not affect the other, but that's what the word comes from. So commensalism, to commence, to begin. Okay, so this is like if you've got a small fish who follows around a shark. Okay, a lot of times if you see a video of a shark, you notice there's 2 or 3 little fish kind of just swimming right by its belly. I've never really had it explained probably why the shark doesn't try to attack them. Maybe they're just like super agile and he can't. He's just like, I'm just going to give up and let him follow me around. But, so they're not really hurting the shark. They're not affecting the shark. But what do they get out of it? Yeah, they're getting the scraps because sharks, they're not like tidy eaters. They've got scraps flying everywhere. And so they can kind of clean up his mess and have plenty of food. Other one, last one benefits and the other organism is harmed. There's parasitism. And there's all kinds of examples of parasites, but probably the one you're most familiar with is ticks. Tickworm, heartworm, intestinal worms, ringworm. The list of worms goes on. All right. Next level of ecology. Populations was one species. When we're talking about all the interacting populations, so lots of species, it is community. And then we have a synonym for environment. This is just kind of the place that an organism has surrounding itself with. Yes, habitat. And we're going to contrast that with its job, what it does. Okay, so like, if we'll pretend I live at school for a second here. So my habitat would be the science room. My job would be, to try to teach science, make an attempt to teach science. So this is, habitat's the place. It is the niche, what the job is. Niche. In the United States, you're going to hear niche mostly. If you go to Europe, maybe they say niche. You go for it. So can you think of some species in Nebraska whose job or niche might be to eat grasses and dig burrows and be prey to larger carnivores? What? Prairie dogs would work, sure. I was going to say rabbits, but prairie dogs works. But think about this too. That's kind of generic. Do prairie dogs and rabbits do the identical things if we got really specific? They do live in the exact same life? Pretty much? Decently? Okay, so I have never seen a big pasture that's just been destroyed by rabbits. But I have seen big pastures that have been destroyed by prairie dogs. So they must not be doing exactly the same job. They're either, living closer together, living more spread apart, digging different styles of burrows. Because we're going to talk about later, we can't have two things doing exactly the same thing in the same place. Because somebody's going to be better at it. Okay? So if we were more specific, I should have added more details to make sure that it was only one thing that would fit there. All right. We're doing fine. All right, so we have these two words that, again, I think you're going to kind of remember. Things that have to eat. What? Not necessarily that they have to eat meat. They have to eat something. Omnivores is an example also. What? Consumers, but There it is. Heterotrophs is our word we're going to have here. Oops. Yeah. And all those words you said, carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, are types of heterotrophs. But your syllabus did not require you to learn those words, so I'm trying to not focus on them. All right. Things that can, alternatively, make their own food. Not heterotrophs, but autotrophs. Again, producers is a synonym for autotrophs, so you're thinking the right direction. All right, this one's probably new. I don't think we know this one. Okay, so unless there's some disaster, places will kind of reach a state of stability where things aren't really changing. You know, things are living their life, we're going through the seasons, but it's kind of stable. But if there's enough human interference, sometimes that stable community will become different. And this is called a dysclimax. And I took a class in college where we talked a lot about this. Like, you know, I'm going to say the wrong one. The Native American people who live down in, like, Arizona, New Mexico. Do you know?
Pueblos?
Isn't that, like, the places where they lived? Isn't that their houses? Anyway, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to say, Mayas were, like, more in Mexico, right? And Aztecs was down there. It's going to bug
I
me
don't
out.
even think it was the same time.
Maybe not. But I remember learning a lot about it. So that area was not always a desert like it is. They think that it's more desert now because those people, like, overused their land, right? So they planted too much. They pulled all the water out of the streams to irrigate their crops, and it became a desert because it was abused by people. And so this is something that we can do, right? We have the ability to totally change our planet. And so then the new community that exists after we have, you know, harmed it or altered it some way is the dysclimax community. All right. This is a weird place for a page break, but we're just going to finish this page and stop. If we have, show a single. If we're showing a single path energy can take, so maybe it's got sunshine going to grass, grass is eaten by a grasshopper, grasshopper gets eaten by a robin. Matt's absolutely right, it's a food chain. Okay, but it's a straight line. Right? There's no branches in a food chain. It's just this to this to this to this. Are ecosystems ever this simple? No. Which is why this is an imperfect representation of ecosystems, but it also is pretty useful. And we will stop there.